when Columbus and his companions set foot in the New World, they inflicted such brutality on the native people that a Spanish historian writes, "Whenever I try to record these atrocities, my hands begin to tremble. On just one island of Hispaniola, the Spanish army wiped out almost 8 million human beings, those people who had lived for thousands of years in a world of peace, love, and simplicity. How were those Native Americans pushed into this hell? Columbus, who was once shown as a hero in stories, how did he become a villain in history, and how did his life end?" You are watching our YouTube channel, Unlocked History Hub, and we are showing you History of America Part 4. It is said that at a banquet, someone asked Columbus, if you had not discovered a route to Asia, someone else would have done it. Then what great achievement did you accomplish? Columbus quietly asked for some eggs. He told everyone, try to make them stand upright. Everyone tried, but the eggs kept rolling to the sides. Then Columbus picked up an egg, tapped it lightly on the table, and made it stand upright. He explained to the people present, the world thinks every success is easy, but the person who takes the first step deserves the real credit, whether the story is true or just an example. But Columbus once again won the hearts of the rulers of Spain. At that moment he demanded from the king and queen, give me a large army, so that I may bring gold from the New World, or that Asia which I have discovered. And if you wish, the native people can also be sent to Spain as slaves. The rulers were so swayed by his promises, that they gave Columbus a grand fleet of 17 ships. More than 1,300 soldiers and crew, swords, guns, gunpowder, and ferocious trained dogs, all were part of this army. On his first voyage he had only 90 men, but now he had the power of nearly 2,000 people in his hands, enough power to crush the entire population of Hispaniola. When Columbus arrived at Hispaniola with his ships, the moment he stepped ashore, a horrifying truth shook him. The 49 Spaniards he had left at Fort Navidad all had been killed. As soon as he left for Spain, those soldiers wandered through forests and villages in search of gold. They abducted women and children, used them for rape, torture, and slavery. Eventually the natives had enough. They attacked the fort, killed the Spaniards, and burned Fort Navidad. Seeing this, Columbus was filled with a mad rage. He ordered his soldiers find gold, and enslave any native you can. But by then the entire region already understood the truth, that these strangers were not good. They had come to enslave them and steal their gold. People abandoned their villages and fled into the forests. When the Spaniards reached their homes, there were only empty huts. Gold was nowhere to be found either. By 1495, Columbus was drowning in continuous failures. No gold was found, so he adopted a new, demonic strategy: slavery. He gathered his entire army and launched large-scale attacks on the villages of Hispaniola. 1,500 men, women, and children were captured. They were chained like animals, beaten, and locked in pens. Guards and bloodthirsty dogs were assigned for watch. 500 strong slaves were sent to Spain. On the way, nearly 200 died from diseases. Those who reached Spain, they could not survive the European climate and soon died. This slavery also failed. So Columbus adopted yet another cruel method: forced labor. In Haiti he ordered that every man over the age of 14 must bring a fixed amount of gold every 3 months. Those who completed the task were given a copper token to hang around their neck. Whoever did not have this token, their hands were cut off, and they bled to death. Thousands of people were sent into the mountains to dig those mountains from top to bottom again and again. Those who washed the gold had to remain bent for hours in water. Their backs broke. In these mines at least 1/3 of the population died from hunger and diseases. Men were sent to far-off mines. Women were forced into agriculture, and the labor was so extreme that the entire nation became barren. Mothers could not breastfeed their babies, because hunger had destroyed their bodies. Thousands of children died from starvation, and many mothers drowned their own babies, because they could not watch them die in agony. This was the world that Columbus and his companions created in the New World, where the greed for gold buried humanity itself. Husbands would breathe their last in the darkness of the mines, wives would collapse and die in the fields, and children, crying in hunger, shriveled and died in their mother's arms. Within just a few years, this fertile land, which was once full of life, became empty of humans, transformed into a graveyard. A Spanish writer who came after Columbus saw this destruction with his own eyes. He writes, "The scenes were such that my soul began to tremble. Even describing these horrors is torment. Time kept passing, but instead of decreasing, the cruelty increased. The Spaniards had become so addicted to luxury that they no longer wished to walk. They used the native people like animals. Sometimes they sat on a man's back and traveled. and sometimes they sat comfortably in a hanging hammock made of ropes. 2 natives would walk forward and backward, carrying the weight. The slave walking behind would shade the masters with large leaves, and the other would cool them by fanning them with bird feathers. These were the same Spaniards who called themselves the most civilized people of the world. Yet they considered the blood, honor, and lives of Native Americans cheaper than grains of sand. They had arrived in the New World as explorers, but within a few months they had become savage executioners. Some soldiers, just to test the sharpness of their swords, would skin living human beings, and they would stand and watch their screams as if it were entertainment. Once, 2 soldiers cut off the heads of 2 natives simply because they liked their parrots, and for fun, they also blew off the heads of 2 children. This barbarity was not limited to Hispaniola. On other islands of the West Indies, death was dancing as well. In Cuba alone, in just 3 months, 7,000 children died. The Native Americans saw all this, and became exhausted from forced labor, massacres, rape, and humiliation. They resisted, but they were wounded before the European weapons. Many left their homes and hid in mountains and dense forests. But even there, their lives were not safe. Spanish soldiers chased them with bloodthirsty dogs. Whoever came into their hands, they shot them dead. Whoever managed to flee, they set the dogs on them. The dogs tore their bodies into pieces and devoured them. When death was seen spreading everywhere, the native people made one final, unbelievable decision. One fruit, which they called cassava, became both the source of their survival and their death. This fruit was their food, and its extracted poison was used on the tips of their hunting arrows. When humans snatched away from them the right to remain human, the Arawak people decided that rather than living in enduring slavery and humiliation, it is better to die. They began mass suicides using the poisonous substance of cassava. Mothers poured the poison into the mouths of their children so they wouldn't have to hear their screams from European hands. But of course, not everyone could kill themselves. Many fled to other islands. Among them was the great chief of Hispaniola, Hachui. He took his people with him and reached Cuba. He had a small amount of gold. He placed that gold before his people and said, "This is the root of our destruction. This glowing stone is what has become our death." He threw that gold into the river so that European greed would not follow it. But the blind river of greed never stops. The Spaniards reached Cuba as well. They killed half the tribe of Hachui and enslaved the rest. But Hachui was neither shot nor enslaved. He was tied to a pile of dry wood in front of everyone, and they set it on fire. But moments before death, he spoke the most venomous truth in history. When a priest invited him to accept the truth and follow the path to heaven, Hachui replied, "If in heaven are the people who are Christians like you, then I would prefer to go to hell." It was a sentence that kept European priests ashamed for centuries. Murder, rape, slavery, starvation, if anyone was responsible for all of it, then it was the leader of that greed, Christopher Columbus. The gold he had promised, it never reached Spain, but the stories of his cruelty did reach the royal court of Spain, and then began the downfall of Columbus, which started at the hands of his own 2 brothers. In 1496, when Columbus went to Spain for the second time, he handed over the responsibility of the island to his brothers, but they committed even worse atrocities than those Columbus had begun. They snatched away whatever little freedom the native chiefs had, and created a new system of gold plundering. On the other hand, the Spaniards who had come to the New World after hearing tales of rivers of wealth became furious because here they found nothing but hunger, forests, and despair. The result was that a rebellion broke out against Columbus and his brothers, and piles of complaints reached the Spanish court. Finally, the King of Spain sent his Chief Justice to Hispaniola so that he could witness with his own eyes the truth of Columbus's empire of cruelty. By the time he reached the coasts of South America, that is the area of present-day Venezuela, Columbus had only one obsession: gold. He dug the land like a madman everywhere, asked people, and wandered along the shores. He was still firmly convinced that he was standing on the edges of Asia, the same Asia that Marco Polo had mentioned in his travelogues, and about which he believed that the very land was made of gold. Although the reality was standing right in front of him, screaming that this was not the Asia of Marco Polo. For a person like Columbus, truth did not matter. He returned empty-handed from Venezuela and went back to Hispaniola. But this time, the situation was not in his hands. During this period, a high-ranking officer from Spain had arrived in Hispaniola, and he listened to all the complaints of the Spanish settlers and the native people regarding Columbus's cruelty, greed, and mismanagement. The result was that Columbus and both of his brothers were imprisoned in iron chains and sent to Spain in October 1500. But one of Columbus's abilities always worked, the power of speech. On the return voyage to Spain, he wrote a letter to the king and queen. In the letter, he explained in a highly emotional manner that although he had not yet found gold, he was very close to it. This was a final attempt, but it worked. The king and queen ordered his release and met him in Granada in December 1500. Columbus promised that if he were allowed to go again, he would return only when he had truly found gold. This promise pleased the royal couple, and he was allowed one last expedition. However, this time his governorship was taken away. He was no longer a ruler but merely an explorer. In 1502, he began his fourth and final voyage. He was still under the same delusion that he was near Asia. He even hoped that he might encounter Vasco da Gama somewhere, while in reality, they were thousands of miles apart. Columbus searched for gold everywhere in Honduras, Panama, and Nicaragua, but luck was not on his side. At one point, he became stranded with 57 companions at Santa Gloria in Jamaica. Food was scarce, the sea route was blocked, and hope began to die. He sent a few companions in a ship to Hispaniola for help, but as soon as they left, problems increased. Now, he had neither food nor help, and the natives were no longer willing to provide more food. At this point, Columbus played his strangest and most famous trick. He frightened the native chiefs into believing that God was displeased with them because they were not feeding his people. Columbus devised a new trick to pressure the native chiefs. He realized that now only a threat would work. He told the chiefs that due to their slowness and refusal to provide food, God was angry with them, and very soon he would punish them through famine, diseases, and a heavenly sign. He ordered them to look at the sky at night, because very soon the moon would turn blood red. The native people listened with wide eyes, but in reality, there was no divine wrath anywhere. The real story was something else. Columbus had a European astronomical calendar that listed the dates of lunar and solar eclipses. He already knew that 3 days later, on February 29, 1504, there would be a total lunar eclipse. This certainty gave him the courage to issue such a bold threat. When the night of the eclipse arrived, the moon indeed turned red. The Native Americans, terrified, ran to Columbus's tents and offered all the food, water, and whatever they had. Thus, Columbus saved his life by turning merely an astronomical event into the wrath of God. He remained stranded in Jamaica for almost a year. During this time, the companions he had sent on a ship to Hispaniola finally reached their destination, and ultimately help arrived in Jamaica. Columbus saved his life and returned to Spain via Hispaniola, but his return was not a sign of success. This voyage was one of the most failed and most painful experiences of his life. The man who had always dreamed of reaching China and Japan eventually returned to Spain in illness and old age, and stayed there until 1506. Columbus, whose expeditions had swallowed the lives of millions of native people, himself died in comfort. Until his death, he received the share promised to him from the gold of the New World. Even though he remained under the misconception until his last breath that he had reached Asia, immediately after his death, others recognized the deception. In 1511, the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci realized that this was not Asia but a completely new world. He saw the land from north to south where today the Amazon and Brazil are located. For this reason, the New World was called America after his name, Amerigo, but the wounds left by Columbus were very deep. Only 21 years after his arrival in the West Indies, the entire island of Hispaniola had been emptied of its human population. Nearly 8 million Arawak people were killed, died of disease, and starvation. According to historian David Stannard, the destruction in Hispaniola was 50 times greater than the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. The story of the other islands was different and even more horrific. When the native people were wiped out, European invaders brought black slaves from Africa who were forcibly settled in these lands. Thus began a new and long era of slavery. The Arawak nation did not completely disappear. The children who migrated to South America survived, and even today, their descendants are found in the regions of Venezuela, Guyana, and Suriname. The places where once Columbus's name was a symbol of fear, today it is considered a symbol of hatred. Even after Columbus's death, Spain's conquests did not stop. Their attention now turned beyond the West Indies to South America, where the Aztec Empire existed with glory and power. This was the place where the treasures, gold, and wealth truly were. But the Aztec people, unlike the Arawak, were not weak. They were strong warriors, their empire was powerful, and they put up a vigorous resistance to the European invaders. What happened next? Which was the last state that stood in the way of Spain, and which God did the Aztecs recognize after a long time? You will see all of this in the next episode of The History of America. Meanwhile, a complete documentary story exists on Mussolini's tragic life, and on the other side, a film based on the horrifying reality of the Sicilian Mafia.